We'll get started. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Jill Clark, and I'm the Athletic Communications Coordinator at the University of Toronto, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started with our webinar, we're so happy to have Will Rolson, Associate Executive Director, to provide some insight from our parent association, College Sports Communicators. Will?
Thank you, Jill. Can everyone see my screen? Right. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to talk just a little bit here about College Sports Communicators. As many of you would probably know, it has been a very busy last year with a new membership model and, of course, a new name, brand, colors, College Sports Communicators. So I wanted to take this time to provide a few reminders and insight into our association, particularly for those who might not be members, and more so for those who might not be as familiar with our organization from Canadian institutions or conferences. So we'll jump right in here. Again, College Sports Communicators exist primarily, for the 5 reasons you see here, as I think most associations would model themselves, and certainly advocating for our members and the profession, connecting everyone, whether that's through networking, mentoring, or the honors programs, which I think we're well known for. And really the education piece is what I think we do, really well. I think we were exceptional in that into and during the pandemic, and glad to have our second in-person convention since the pandemic coming up in just a few weeks down in Orlando, Florida. And then that 5th tenet, really, providing the general support that our members need and to make the profession what it can be. These are our signature programs, certainly the convention, and as some of you may know, we renamed that to CSC Unite, effective for this year's convention, and that's a name we will carry forward. The Academic All-America program and Hall of Fame, as I mentioned, the continuing education piece is something that we do well, and not just at the convention, but our year-round continuing education program, such as this itself, as a Canadian group is putting on, is a part of, and then in general year-round membership services in their many forms. Some of those services and benefits you see here, again, leadership opportunities. As most of you probably know, we're proud to have Mary Beth Challoner from Toronto as our 3rd vice president this year, and she'll move up through the rotation, so we'll be president of our association in 3 years. The member pricing for the convention and the Career Center is always a good benefit. The mentorship opportunities, I know the Canadian group has your own mentorship program, but if you'd like to be part of a program with a little broader scope, certainly we can get you signed up for that for next academic year later this summer or early fall. The opportunity to contribute and be featured in publications, and I will say this is where I'd really like this group to take a step forward over the next year. I usually mention this on most every one of our monthly CANSIDA cabinet calls, but I really don't feel we've had enough features on Canadian members. I think Connor was profiled during Membership Appreciation Week last fall. So look to anybody on this call if you'd like to nominate someone. Please get that name to me, and we'll kind of put that in our file. Not just for that, but we have a couple other programs like Women to Watch, and a diversity and inclusion program as well. The awards and recognition, again, please jump in and nominate yourself and your projects for certain things. I know I just saw the voting for the Changemaker Innovation Award, which is just in its 3rd year. I don't think we had any Canadian nominations this year, so we'd love to see a couple by this time next year. And again, as I mentioned, our academic programs as well. Membership dues, looking ahead to 23-24, I had to say that those prices will remain unchanged from this past year, when we did, of course, bring in the new all-in membership, which for those of you who may not be familiar is really an unlimited group membership. The rate this year for Canadian institutions was $270 US. Sometime later this summer, before we launch our membership year, we will look at the exchange rate and adjust that if needed. So that's something we put into place a year or 2 ago that had long been a request from some of our Canadian members. And then if the all-in membership, for whatever reason, is not appropriate for your institution, individual memberships for Canadians is $140 US dollars, again, subject to the exchange rate as noted below. I know we've got 5 or 6 Canadian members coming to this year's convention in Orlando next month. I know next year will be the priority year for Canadians. We look forward to bringing back your divisional day when we get to Las Vegas. So those are the dates to keep in mind: June 9th through 12th, again, back at Mandalay Bay Resort, where we were a year ago. And as always, our registration will open in mid-February, late next winter. The Academic All-America program, and I know that doesn't always apply to all of our members north of the border, but it is available if that's something you'd like to nominate your student athletes for. Getting to the end here, again, these are really the 3 pieces we look to, to push some of the leadership opportunities, the education, as I mentioned earlier, and then just making sure we're partnering with all the appropriate organizations, and that would include youth sports and the College Division Association in Canada. So we want to make sure those are strong partnerships, and we're working together. And if there's anything we can do specifically to strengthen those, help each of you out, please don't hesitate to let us know. Happy to answer any questions here that you may have, and as always, you can reach out to myself or any member of our staff. Jill, as president of the CANSIDA cabinet, Mary Beth in her role on our executive board as well. So we'd be happy to answer any questions here if you have any.
Thanks, Will.
All
That's
right.
amazing. And yeah, guys, don't hesitate to reach out to Will. He's very responsive. Everyone from CSC is very responsive, and it's a great organization. And I hope if you haven't been involved with them yet, that this is the year, because we are doing a big push for Vegas, and we want a large Canadian contingent there in 2024.
Thank you, Jill. You see my contact information on the screen, and look forward to seeing everybody soon. Thanks, Jill.
Perfect. Thanks, Will. Before we get started with our program, I just wanted to encourage everyone to use the chat function or your hand raise function to ask any questions you have along the way. This is meant to be a presentation with a lot of discussion, so please don't be shy. This is Mastering Your Writing Skills. We have an all-star panel for you today, including Rich Abney, Sports Information Director at the University of Northern British Columbia, Adam Smith, Sports Marketing Officer at St. Lawrence College, and the one and only Earl the Pearl Zuckerman, Sports Information Officer at McGill University. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Rich Abney from UNBC to get us started with feature stories.
Thank you, Jill. Can everyone can hear me? Is that safe to say? My mom's going to be thrilled to find out I'm on an all-star panel, so I'll take that to the bank. As Jill mentioned, I'm Rich. I'm from UNBC. I've been in the job for about 7 or 8 years. I'm not totally sure why I was asked to speak today, beyond the fact that every year I try to write a couple feature-length, sort of magazine-style long-form stories, which, as we all know in our jobs, are harder and harder to make time for as social media takes over, and video and graphic design and all these sort of things that maybe weren't part of the job even X amount of years ago. Never mind when Pearl started. It's more and more of a sort of a shrinking, I don't want to say art, but there's less time. We're lucky at my school. For those that don't know UNBC, we're one of the smallest schools in the country, which means that we don't have as many sports. Means we have less national championships and playoff appearances, but it also means that we get access to our athletes at a level that maybe some of the SIDs at the really huge schools comparatively don't necessarily have the benefit of. And that's led to some really cool opportunities to tell some stories. So I'll go real quickly. I know you guys don't need to hear from me for a long time. I'm sure some of you are better writers than I am, so maybe you can just get one thing from it or steal an idea, and that's great if it makes more stories being told. So I came from TV originally, so I wasn't a writer by trade, but I guess storytelling, without sounding too much like a donkey, was sort of the world I came from. And like I said, I think access, we're in a really unique position, more so than the ADs, even the coaches who have a different sort of relationship. But athletes sort of trust us and look to us to tell their stories. And we all get the messages, hey, I don't like that photo you posted to me, or oh, that graphic's rough. My hair doesn't look right, or, that sort of thing. But that also means that there's a communication between you and the athletes, or you and the coaches, or you and administrators or alumni. as a responsibility maybe to tell some stories. It's always hard to decide what should be a 45-second vertical video on TikTok, what should be a 3-minute, maybe long form story around something important, and what should be a basic A-B media release, and what should be maybe a longer form story. And that's for you guys to decide as each thing sort of comes to you. But I thought I would go over just a couple of stories that I've written over the last few years and maybe just give you a little insight how that came along. Like I mentioned, the access, here, I'll share my screen here. I practiced before, so hopefully this shows up. Here's a story I wrote a few years ago about Michael Henman. I don't know if anyone knows Michael from this year. He led the country in goals in soccer this year. He scored 19 goals in 14 games, I think he outscored 22 of the schools in the country on his own. But what people might not know if they hadn't read this story is Mike graduated 2 years late from high school because he couldn't basically get out of bed. He had such crippling mental health issues. And then when he could go to school, his dad retired early and would sit outside his high school 8 hours a day in his car in case Mike needed to flee. You know, I mean that respectfully. And what the cool thing was Mike's youth coach, when all this started, was Steve Simonson, who's our men's soccer coach. And Steve always said to Mike, when you're ready and when you graduate, if we can make the academics work, there's a spot for you here. And so 2 years after he's supposed to graduate, he arrived at UNBC. Many a game he couldn't get on the airplane or couldn't get on the bus, or he couldn't come on the bus back because out of anxiety issues. He'd throw up. He wouldn't come out for the second half. I scored 1 goal in his first year, 2 goals in his second year, 3 goals in his third year, and 19 goals this year. So a pretty special guy. But again, this story was important. He came to me and said there'd been a couple suicides of high school kids in Prince George, and he said, let's tell this story. So this was written actually just after his first year. It's long. It's about 4,800 words, which is no fun to write. It's a very magazine style in terms of its form and its descriptiveness. But yeah, that's I'll put some links up if anyone's interested. And I don't mean that in a sniff the throne kind of way. I just mean if you guys are interested in the sort of writing that this is all about. So that's Mike's story, and really lucky to be able to tell that story. The next point I want to make is about deciding, again, like what I said, what should be video, what should be TikTok, what should be Instagram, what should just be your short form story. I struggle with that, of course. Like I mentioned, I'm from TV originally, and we're all limited by the fact that we have 1,000 things to do, synergies, you know, not working, or stat crew, or presto, or sidearm, or your coach is upset about something. The last thing you want to do is sit down and try to describe a scene that happened, you know, 14 years ago or something. But there's a place for it. I grew up reading SI every week, you know, Rick Riley and Jeff Pearlman and E.M. Swift and Tom Verducci and all these guys. And that's what I enjoy reading. So if you decide to take the time and read any of these stories, I'm not claiming that you'll necessarily enjoy them, but it's what I like to consume, and it's done well for us out here. But again, what deserves that long form treatment? I like to challenge myself. Again, try to carve out time to write at least 1 or 2 feature stories a year. And sometimes it's about stuff I don't know. It doesn't have to be heavy stories. It can be about just something that you're interested in. I'm not a soccer guy by trade. I played hockey, and we had a soccer game here. Again, we're not a hugely successful university at the U Sports level when it comes to wins and losses. But so when something big happens, it sort of gets elevated. And we were playing in the number 2 team in the country at the time, and our little 5'8" goalie made a diving save in the 93rd minute to help us beat MRU in the rain. Anyways, I wanted him to break down the save for me, basically second by second. So he came to my office. We sat him in front of a computer, and I'm sharing my screen again, hopefully. And I wanted him to go second by second and explain the story, just what was going into each save. Now, it might not be that interesting to someone who's not a soccer person or doesn't give you know what about UNBC, but I thought it was an interesting thing. And as he was going through it, he was saying, well, I had to take a step early because I'm small and I've always been small. And so that was that. And then a few seconds later, well, it's raining, but I grew up in Bishop Stortford in England. And so I grew up playing in the rain. And I realized, like, oh, this entire save was informed by the everything that led up to this very moment. And so this is another long form story. It's about 4,000 words. And it's second by second, as you'll see. I'm just going to scroll so you can kind of see. Hopefully that's reflective, but second by second. And about half of it is spent describing that second, and half of it is describing this, what led into that second. And when you're writing stuff like this, at least for me, psychologically, you worry about it being a little bit self-indulgent. Like, do I really need to break it down like this? Is this just so I can show off that I can use this word, or is this, who cares? And quite honestly, in a lot of cases, I don't know if we all feel that way, but in some cases there's that, what's this all for? But what comes out of it is of this sort of love letter to an athlete's career that he has, talking about this special save that he made, but also about his career, and his family has that now. So that's an interesting story. And again, from a completely different format, from something I wasn't necessarily educated about, but led to a really interesting piece, in my opinion. I'll go fast. I know we're running out of time. Again, not every story has to be heavy. I've written some stuff about mental health. I'm working on right now about one of our soccer goalies, whose brother unfortunately overdosed this past year. And so she came to me about the opioid crisis and how she thought we could help some people. So I'm working on that story right now. Those are no fun to tell, but some stuff is fun to tell. I went on the women's soccer playoff road trip just for a game down to UBC to play Manitoba and then UBC a couple of years ago. And I didn't have any plan to do anything. I had plans to sleep and catch up on Photoshop and things like that. And I had my cell phone with me, and I thought this might be kind of fun. So I decided to take some pictures and write just some notes about what was happening. And I wrote a road trip diary. Oops, I don't know where I went there. Write a road trip diary. It's not award-winning writing or anything, but it's sort of a fun peek. You can see the quality of the photos isn't anything special. It's not long form in any stretch. It's quite tongue-in-cheek in a lot of ways, Tim Hortons strips, etc. But it sort of tells the story of life on the bus. For us anyway, our closest game is an 8-hour bus ride away. That's our closest competitor. So you can imagine when we go on road trips, these athletes spend a lot of time together, and studying and sleeping and coaches and snacks and Tim Hortons stops, etc. I wrote it literally that night, posted it the next day after they beat Manitoba in PKs to move on in the playoffs. There's a girl crying because someone died in Star Wars, I think is what happened, when she's watching on herself or on her computer. But that ended up being our most viewed page on our entire university website that year. And it was written in one evening. Again, it's not like I'm not digging in and writing this beautiful stuff. It's just you're there and there's a chance to write. It's a feature in a different sense. So that's kind of a fun one. And then lastly, to go back to some of the heavier stuff, quite honestly, I don't love writing. I don't know if anybody loves writing. If you love the process of ass and seed and just trying to pick the right word and getting writer's block and battling through it and making somebody else's story ultra important, and therefore it's a big responsibility. We had an athlete come in this year, and she talked to me and said that she had suicidal thoughts for years, and had this was her first year back, and she had read Michael Henman's story a few years prior, and that had helped her, and she thought that maybe we could do something. Well, on the outside I'm smiling and saying, yeah, absolutely, let's do it. And on the inside I'm thinking, oh no, shit, this is not going to be fun to write. And now there's a big responsibility. But I did decide it would be a good challenge and an important challenge. And so we did Sarah Lapine's story, which is here. There's Sarah there. She's lovely. And again, just to sort of challenge myself, I decided to kind of change the format of how I wrote. So I wanted to work backwards, knowing that she played her first ever game this past year, got into her first game ever. So I wanted that to be the ending of the story. And then how was I going to get there? So this is about a 4,000 word story about Sarah, her battle with mental illness and her return to the game and sort of triumphant return to the pitch. And so again, not a fun story to write, but an important story to write. And I think that we are in a unique position as storytellers. I don't love that word, but storytellers in many senses, that to and to pick and choose what is that's my dog throwing up, by the way. I don't know if you guys heard that far away, but clean up for me after. Yeah, we get to choose, and I sometimes maybe don't always decide. I did a video this year on our Pride Day with an athlete, a non-binary athlete. Could that have been a written feature? Yeah, of course. Or could any of those, for example, could that road trip diary, could that have been a video? Yeah, of course. But we're in this sort of unique spot where we get to sort of dictate content and work with our athletes and tell stories. And sometimes it's worth it to put your ass in seat, which is sort of the first rule of writing, whether it be at your kitchen table, at the desk, at Starbucks or your local coffee shop, and force yourself into it. So I know ADs want stuff yesterday, athletes want stuff a week ago, and your coaches want stuff a month ago. But if you can sort of challenge yourself, if you're comfortable to write a story a year, even, that's not your media release, AB, info quote, or your recap, stats quote. It can end up being a really rewarding experience and something that really stands the test of time. So I think I was wildly miscast to do this presentation today, but I hope it served a little bit of purpose. And I don't, it says Q&A. I don't know if anyone's going to have any questions. I said a lot of verbal diarrhea here today, but
Rich, that was I love it. You do actually have two questions.
Oh.
The first from Andrea at TMU. She's wondering if you can share some metrics from them. Are these your top performing stories, or how do they compare to your game recaps or your other content on your website?
Yeah, well, as far as if you're comparing writing to writing, Andrea, they crush all but partly that's because we've sort of minimized our writing now, our recaps to, at Canada West anyways, recaps aren't even required, or, we're small enough that we write a release about every athlete that commits, but those don't do very big numbers. The Michael Henman story was, I don't know, I'm not gonna have numbers for you, but it was wild how big the scope for that one was, which is wonderful. We had people reaching out from Canada and the United States, whether it be with their own experiences or, Michael, we did the Indigenous jerseys this past year. That's a good example of, I chose that we should do a video for that, which really went well. That could have been a written story, but because it was visual, I thought, but for context of like the Michael Henman reach, we made the jerseys available where you could order, and we had a couple different families, not even in Canada, order Michael Henman jerseys for their family, number 9 jerseys, which is like, I try to tell them how sort of ridiculous that is, that this is happening to a sort of a Canadian university athlete at this tiny school of 2,500 in northern British Columbia. But it just shows like the reach of some of this stuff. I know some people, I'm sure that you can do the metrics of how far people get in stories. I'm sure when you're writing 4,500 word stories at times that it peters out if you're at second 4 of the 9 seconds of a soccer save and you don't care. I get it. But sometimes when I say love letters, hopefully that's not getting misconstrued there, but a lot of our work really is love letters to our schools and our athletes and our coaches and our alum and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, hopefully that answered your question, Andrea.
Oh, I think that's great. You have one more question from Ryan Miller at Centennial College. He's curious how you interview these athletes. Is it in person, on Zoom, or do you just email them a bunch of questions and ask them to fill it out, or how do you operate?
Yeah, I definitely don't do the email, fill me out the questions, as you're not getting, I get that sometimes, when I'm doing commitments and that sort of thing, that's of course, maybe sometimes the best way to do stuff, or that's all you get, or your coach texts you a quote about something because he's in a loud gym, or sometimes we're limited. And Zoom's wonderful, as you can see, where there's 47 of us here, but I try to get the person in the room. The Rob Goody story about a save doesn't happen if he's not there in front of the screen and goes to share. And Sarah Lapine coming into the office to share, where she can sort of close the door and say, this is what's up with my life. It serves 2 purposes. It's giving her a chance to share her story just at a personal level, and B, allows her the privacy to sort of talk about where she's at. And yeah, I don't know if there's one perfect way to do it. I don't profess to be a perfect writer by any stretch, but I try to go face to face with them. Of course, you have to call them afterwards and say, hey, I want to make sure I get this timeline right, or hey, can you confirm this or that? But I try to get people in the room. Right now, I'm working on one as well. We had a women's basketball season a couple of years ago where we had 4 ACL tears and 2 girls bonked heads and both broke their noses. And so we only had 6 players. And we played the last 8 games of the year with only 6 players. And then in the playoffs, you had to have 7. So one girl was just dressing and not playing. And we went on an 8-game winning streak to end the season, and then 1 in double OT in Lethbridge and that sort of thing with 6 players. So I'm writing a story right now, just like a fun sort of look back on that. That's a lot of Maria Mongomo is in Spain right now. So like that's a Zoom interview, and Madison Landry's in Calgary. And so that's chatting over the phone as well. But I think best case Ontario, you get them in the room.
Awesome. Thank you, Rich. In the interest of time, we will move forward, but that was amazing.
Yeah, what I'll do, sorry, Jill,
yeah.
maybe I'll just post, not because I care about these years later metrics, but maybe I'll post the links to those if anyone wants to take a look at them, if that's a desire.
That would be great. Please do. So next up, we have Adam Smith from St. Lawrence College to speak about social media captions. So the exact opposite of what Rich just spoke to. Adam, oh gosh. Hi, Adam.
Hey, everybody. So I'm going to do social media captions. And if this didn't get your attention, probably my sunburn underneath will. So I'm going to take this helmet off because oh, sorry about that. I think I was about 3 minutes from passing out. Can you guys hear me okay? Yes?
Yeah.
A quick shout out to my boss, manager Kevin Biggs, and Ryan Miller, who's in the active chat here, who continues to push me to do my job better and better these days. But yeah, so I'm going to roll through a presentation for you. It's 10 slides. Hopefully it won't take too long. And I find typically with social media, it's the questions that hold the most value. So hopefully we have lots of time for that. So let me know if you guys can see all this.
Looks good.
Oh, my sunburn is awful. That's all yesterday, folks. Alrighty, so social media, this is kind of social media in general, but we can always tie everything in social media back to each individual element of it, whether it's the graphic itself or the captions. So we'll see how we relate this to captions. Little quote to start: the average attention span of the modern human being is about half as long as whatever you're trying to tell them. And I don't know who Meg is, but this is how that makes me feel. Nobody has any time to capture any attention anymore. I'm going to admit Joe in here. Okay, there we go. And then we know that 8 seconds is about all you have for attention spans. And that number is going to seem large. And that's because that's the overall attention span in general these days. That's not social media. That's in general. So if I play that back, if you see the clock, it's actually more like 3 to 4 seconds. So that's running a little faster. So you don't have a lot of time to get people's attention. And I love Rich's feature stories, and I wish I had the capacity and skill to do that. But Instagram is the main example that we use the most. You really only have that quick scroll to get someone's attention. So whatever the content is, it needs to be pretty gripping. You need to catch it quickly, which was the purpose of this fun fella. So there's 3 keys to content and by association captions that I try and keep in mind each time I'm creating content on social media. And the first is obviously the audience. The audience is unique to each institution. So for St. Lawrence, we're small enough where if my focus is varsity, then I'm not going to reach the entire student population. I'm going to segment that into just people interested in varsity, and then probably the content will look a lot different. So my content is more geared towards the whole student body in general, and even the staff and faculty at the college to get them all engaged. So I'm always keeping in mind the audience of the content that I'm producing and who's going to see it. And then secondly is the quality of it. So I'm in a very fortunate position where I take most of the photography at our sports games and events. I do all the graphic design for what you see on Instagram is kind of like our highlight reel of content. And then I do all the publishing of the content and the caption writing. So I have a kind of a full 360 creative control over the content. So when I'm taking photos or capturing video, I'm always thinking about the end use of it. Where am I going to post this photo? Or if I see, for example, I took a photo of a squirrel once during a soccer game. All right, I was like huddled in the corner taking photos of action. Then the squirrel came like 10 feet in front of me. And I was like, oh, that'll be fun for social media, right? So I took that photo, but if you're hiring a photographer, he or she may not take that photo thinking, oh, they can use that on social media, right? Their goal is to take the game. Whereas me, I'm looking at, what kind of quality content can I get out of everything I'm doing at all times. So that second part is quality, and then the third part is engaging. So how do we engage with the quality content that we're publishing? And a lot of this comes down to caption writing. So you'll see. I think we'll roll through some review of content. I'm not going to get into too much specifics. I think I have 3 examples to show you guys, but this will be a review of the types of content that we would produce. And you'll get a sense of kind of where we're going here. So there's different types of content. Some of it is credibility content to kind of, you'll see the top left there, there's #1 in Canada post. That's blown out of proportion like you wouldn't believe. That's like a third-party journalistic article trying to probably get some ad revenue. But it is something published on the internet. So I blew it up and made a stink of it and tagged Queen's University, and they shared it too. And so we, that kind of thing adds credibility to someone who might choose our college at the end of the day. There's timely content. So AI technology, I'll show you an example in a minute. It's very timely right now. So, publishing timely content is always important to get that engagement. Success stories, Rich showed you some really great success stories in written format. It's very easy to do that on social media as well. This is funny. It's in quotes because my wife doesn't think I'm as funny as I do. So what I think is funny may not be funny, but I'm always thinking about the end user, and that's the student or staff. So what might they think be funny? And then I'm going to try and create content around that. And then informational, which is more, hiring or game day information. It doesn't have to be as flashy, but it just tells you the key info that you need to hear. And then this is just some fancy PowerPoint stuff that I did. So yeah, success to me is the most important in terms of telling your story. But I don't want to go too far into like the actual post itself because we want to talk about caption writing. So the first example here is more timely than anything, but I try and add a little bit of humor in most of the things I do on social media. But here's one that's AI generated with Adobe Firefly, which if you guys have access to Creative Suite, you can get invited to the beta, which is I don't want to say free because you have to pay for Creative Suite, but you do have access. If your college or university has Creative Suite for your positions, you can get into the Adobe Firefly AI beta. So this is an example of a post I did recently. The numbers on how it did, not very good. Might just be the picture, but the caption itself is light and funny, right? Like it's like I have to always do this funny. But it's very timely. It's talking about technology and things that are in the news today, but I'm relating it back to sports and the college as a whole. And then I'm asking them a question, which one do you like best? Is it, is it a vibe? Is it not a vibe? And giving them the information so they can see why this was made, which is like the prompt there. And the prompt is what you use in AI to give it to produce the graphic or image. And then I entice or engage with, this could be a new thing every Friday, Adobe Firefly Fridays. I've done it once, so it's not something I've followed up on because the numbers weren't there. So that's one example. And then after this, we'll do questions, of course. So here's 2 examples. One is key info, and then the other one again is kind of funny. Key info, and this is one that we all do, and that's a game day coming up. The graphic is probably 10 times fancier than it has to be, but that's my personal preference, is to make it look as good as it can, to build up our college to a level that it may or may not be. And again, the caption is short and sweet because we want the key info to be the driving information here. So all or nothing is just it's like a tagline for a movie, right? Something very quick that people can understand that this is a game that means everything. And if you win, you're on. If you lose, you're out. So, and then the key info is right there with emojis, playoff game, us versus Conestoga, date, time, location. The emojis are not necessary, folks, but they do help with algorithms. Believe it or not, they're not going to tell you that. And algorithms change what seems to be daily on what's actually hitting algorithms and what's not. So it's always good to use the mechanics that social media gives you, because it can and oftentimes boost your posts without you even knowing. Hashtags right now, for example, on certain social media platforms aren't as useful as they used to be. And on Instagram in particular, I use hashtag search together on almost everything I do. And that's only really for our internal audience to find. It's not like an external promotion where people are going to be like, oh, I'm going to type in Surge Together and see what happens. You're probably going to get more Carolina Hurricanes hockey posts than our posts, but I can then group our content together with that. And then the other one is funny. So I don't know if you can see that or not. It might be behind people's faces if we're on camera, but essentially it's a picture of our men's rugby coach, whose name is Dennis Asseltine. And so on Valentine's Day, I thought it would be funny to kind of make a mockery of it with the most, what's it called? The most interesting man alive, the Dos Equis guy. So he's won the Lifetime Achievement Award twice, and he's the most interesting man in the world. But this is Dennis on Valentine's Day. So happy Vasseltine Day. It's absolutely ridiculous, but probably one of the best engaged posts that I did this past semester, because the entire rugby team is obviously going to share it with themselves. Their clubs that Dennis is also part of. The college loved it, and they made me do another one for men's basketball. Again, that's fun, and it's obviously graphic heavy. So like, I have the pleasure of being able to do all that from my desk instead of asking others in other departments to help me with graphics. So the control there is nice. But again, we know funny content works. So anytime you can add that in there without offending, I think it's a good idea. All right. And the last caption example is this absolutely real, but not real Crocs crossover with Surge. I saw, and again, this comes down to timely content too, for any Croc fans out there. I'm definitely one of them, but they introduced that you could build your own Crocs now. And for larger institutions that have budget, I would say that this is something you should look at. But I've had incredible amounts of people asking me, when can we get these? But you have to order a minimum of like 70, and they're $70 each. So it's like, we don't have the budget for Surge Crocs. But when I saw that they came out with that, I instantly came up with this post, made the Crocs in the Croc platform, posted it on social media, and it looks official, like for all intents and purposes, it looks like an official thing. It's obviously not though. So this was engagement created through excitement for people that like Crocs. I've had staff, students, everybody asking me when they can get a pair, and they're probably never going to get a pair. So, while it's not real, it does add engagement levels that you wouldn't get if you were just posting, athletic photos or photos of events at the college. So again, this is not something a graphic designer has to make. This was all built within their platform, but it's something that I saw when scrolling on social media and thought this would be great for our audience. So I pieced it together real quickly, and this is the caption: Surge times Crocs when. That's it. Very simple. Anybody could write that. It doesn't have to be like, doesn't have to be huge strategy involved in caption writing. You just have to be timely and speak to your audience in the way that you think they need to be spoken to in order for them to hear you. It's everybody's, I can't give you any secret tips on how to write, because I think everybody has a unique personality, and social media comes down to voice. And so, I'm fortunate that Kevin Biggs, my manager, has allowed me to kind of just fly with it and let me be who I am behind the screen on social media, because it's working. So so like the bottom line, you've all heard probably the KISS acronym: keep it simple. It's usually stupid, but I'd say silly for social media. And really, I do believe this: keep it as simple as possible so you can attract people's attention almost instantly, and make it as silly enough that they remember it, or want to engage with it. And that's all on top of like your typical game day photos, game day promos. I think you have to do those things, but you also, I think, need to spice it up with other kind of content as well if you're looking to attract a bigger audience. That's everything for me. Any questions?
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. And I agree. I think you are funnier than your wife lets on. Thank you for that, Eric.
She keeps me grounded.
Jordy has a question. He said, you mentioned having complete creative control. Does that mean you can run somewhat independently of institutional brand standards, or do you have to incorporate certain components from the overall brand into your work?
Yeah, I think this is an important question, and one that we had at our recent AGM with the OCAA. And I think a lot of it comes down to trust. So when I was first hired, I was actually hired into the marketing department to work for athletics out of the marketing department, because they were trying to dial in all the branding from the different departments. You know, they're pushing out different brands. And so when I started, it was very much a tight ship. It was, when here's our colors, and I know this already from marketing, but they wanted to really control the messaging and the way it looked to the external facing public. I gained some trust just through quality content, and now they kind of say do whatever you want, and they share my content more so than anybody else's. But I think it does come down to trust and building those relationships with the internal departments. And then also, and everything you do is kind of a sales pitch, right? So you might have to have that conversation with marketing, corporate marketing, to say, like, we need a different voice than what you're doing in order to be successful. And I often equate what we do in athletics and student engagement to servicing like the current student demographic, not the recruitment side. Whereas corporate marketing is all about recruiting. They make the flashy billboards for the roads and whatnot, and ads on social media, whereas we kind of service them when they get here for the most part. So our voice, our imagery, our graphic design, our posts, everything needs to be different because we're speaking to them when they're here, and we're trying to give them a great time so that when they leave, they then tell their friends and family to come here. And then on the side is athletes see us in a different perspective than just a student coming to study, right? So we need to build our brand, especially at St. Lawrence as a smaller college, to be bigger than it is, so that when you come here, you feel like, oh wow, they really got it going on. But we're a small college, so try and make us look as good as we can online. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's definitely a struggle.
That works. That's amazing. Thank you. I am going to follow SLC Surge and check out all of your great work. Thank you, Adam. Next up, we have the man himself, Earl the Pearl Zuckerman, to talk about the art of the game recap. I think he's written a few of these. You're on mute, Earl. Okay.
Sorry about that. I'm a bit old school, so it takes me a minute to catch up with the newer focus on technology. Yeah, thanks for the invite, Jill, and happy to be here. It's hard to talk about writing without getting a little bit boring and mundane. I'll try my best to just go over the simplistic fine points that I think are important. There's a big debate about the value of writing a post-game recap. This was traditionally a big part of time, a chunk of time for all the SIDs across North America. And over the last, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years, as different forms of media, social media have come about, a lot of people, a lot of schools have de-emphasized the post-game story. The way I look at it is we're still doing the social media, that has to be done, but there's a value for doing a post-game story historically, first of all, and secondly, there are people that are interested. It may not generate the same numbers as a fancy TikTok or a fancy post on Instagram, but there is a following. I find for our game stories, we range between 350 and 850 viewers per story, depending on the sport. So there is a value for it, and it's recording history, and I think it's important to record our history. So it's there for the people that want it, and the ones that don't want to read a game story, they can look at the stats or look at the Instagram or other social media. So I think that it's to me, that's the way you have to look at it. I'll touch on a couple of things that Adam just mentioned. Attention span. That's a big issue in writing, and your audience. So I'll start with perhaps the attention span. The typical person doesn't get past the true fan of the team, the parents, the players themselves, the coaches. They will probably read the story from first word to the last word, and then the average fan or media people, they only care about the first couple paragraphs. They lose interest after 2 paragraphs. So the onus is on the writer of a post-game story to give everything they can in the first 2 paragraphs. Who, what, when, where, why, how. All those questions about an event that you're covering should be in the first 2 paragraphs. It shouldn't be a play-by-play game of so-and-so scored at the 3rd minute, and the next person tied it at the 5th minute, et cetera, et cetera. That stuff can go at the bottom of the story if you want to include it. About most of the time, we have box scores, scoring summaries, where people can get that information. You don't really have to write it in a play-by-play fashion, and it's very boring for most readers to write a play-by-play post-game story. So you have to learn to write it with the inverted pyramid style is the way it's described in the media. If you take a course in basic writing, especially news writing, you'll learn the inverted pyramid style. The simplistic way of saying, if you look at a pyramid, the point of the pyramid is the least important information in a pyramid, and the bottom of the story, the base of the paragraph of the story that you're writing is where most of the information is. So you have to learn how to invert that and put the most important information at the top, so that you're feeding down to the least important information in your game story. So as I say, the first 2-3 paragraphs, you have to have the focus that the reader is going to turn away from your story after 2 or 3 paragraphs. So you got to put all your guns, all your marbles in one bag at the beginning. Have a great headline. So that's where the funny content that Adam mentioned sort of comes into play. If you have a great headline, it attracts eyeballs. They may still not get past the 1st, 2nd, 3rd paragraph, but it's going to attract eyeballs, and people will share it and they'll hit like, and they may not have read the whole story, but they'll hit like because they love the headline. You know, I started writing headlines. I sort of got the urine. I used to cover the Montreal Expos games back in the 90s. I was in the press box at the Olympic Stadium, and one of the Expos players, Henry Rodriguez, hit 3 home runs, and this was a breakout game for him. And I'm sitting beside Jeff Blair, who was the writer for the Expos at the time, the beat writer. He's now with the Toronto Star, I believe. And I said, Jeff, I just thought of a great headline for your story. And he's on deadline, right? Henry's done this home run in the 8th or 9th inning, and Jeff Blair's in the last minutes of freaking out because his story is a minute or 2 away from deadline. He says, don't call me. I don't write headlines. Call the desk. So, because the desk is the one that does all the editing. The writer doesn't do the editing for major newspapers. It's an editor in the desk, and those guys write the headlines and typically the captions for photos. So I said, okay, no problem. He didn't even want to know what the headline was. So I called the desk, which is, I had a good rapport with them because I used to call in our scores regularly with them. And I said, I got a great headline for you. Henry Rodriguez hit a home run, hit 3 home runs. And the guy stops and says, don't say, oh, Henry, chocolate bar, oh, Henry. And I said, well, it's kind of related to that, but I said, I get a twist on that. I said, oh, Henry becomes Mr. Big. Mr. Big's a big chocolate bar, and O. Henry's a big chocolate bar, and they used the headline. And I realized the power of it, because the next day it was a big headline in the Gazette, O. Henry becomes Mr. Big. And the next day, everyone brought O. Henry bars, and they were throwing them on the field at Henry Rodriguez, who was the left fielder for the Expos. And I'm thinking, like, wow, that's the power of the press is unbelievable. So then I started thinking about writing headlines. And every time I see a story, especially when I'm writing a story, I'm always thinking, how do I come up with a great headline to attract eyeballs? So that's what I do. And I get a lot of fun. I use alliteration in my headlines. I like repeating the first letter of every word. And my record for repeated words, I think, is 9. It might even be 11, 9 words in a row with the same first letter. So I sometimes try and break that record, but it's really hard to break. Anyway, the point is, if you have a headline that attracts eyeballs, you're ahead of the game. So I write amusing headlines, and I find that it creates interest. That's my way of getting the attention, catching someone's attention. And sometimes you have to read past the 2nd paragraph to understand the headline. It's a bit tricky. But I started doing that, and then some guy in the States, I can't remember, it was a blogger or a reporter, wrote a story about all the headlines that I had written in the past few months. And I realized that it plays a role. So if you're going to do a post-game story, maybe give it a little more thought. And sometimes I'm searching for a word, you're there, it's late at night, and you can't figure what you want to put in the headline, but I know I want to include this person because they scored 4 goals or something. So I use a thesaurus, an online thesaurus, and I say what rhymes. I check words that rhyme or work for. You can do what rhymes with on Google. You can do a search, what rhymes with Jack, or you can do a search asking for give me another name. Like you can look for words that begin with the letter C. So it's a useful tool for me when I have writer's block and I can't think of something that's sort of cute. The other thing I wanted to talk about briefly was the audience. So when you write a post-game story, you have to think of who the audience is that you're going after. Some people just care about the athletes. It's a small school. We're all about student body. We're about students showing up at games and participating. And maybe if that's your focus, then you have to write a different story. But when I write, first of all, we cover, when I started, we had 50 sports at McGill. Now we're down to 26 teams. So it's still a lot of teams. It's probably up there in the top 4 or 5 in the country for most varsity teams at a school. And so our media and our audience is a lot bigger than having 6 or 8 schools, 8 teams in a school. And so the way I see my audience is it's not only the athletes, it's their parents, their friends, it's the student body. I'm trying to get the faculty and staff. I want the principal to read our story. I want the alumni to read our story, general fans to read our story, and even probably most important is I want the media to read our story. So I write with all that in mind. And so if I've got someone on my team and they're from Castlegar, BC, a small little town out on the West Coast, I always mention the hometowns. To me, it's critical. I'll put the hometown in, and all these reporters, they kind of follow their athletes as they go off to school in other provinces or states, and they like to follow what their athletes are doing and where they are. So I always include hometowns. To me, it's critical to include that. And then I typically will try to include, if they're in a good academic program, like if they're in engineering or science, or if they're in medicine or whatever, I always include that stuff because the faculty and the staff and the principal, the administrators, they're all interested in that. If that's near the front of the story, they'll read the story. If it's buried at the end or not in there, they'll lose interest. So anyway, the point is you have to decide what kind of audience that you want. And if you want all those audiences, then the post-game story is where you can kind of use little shortcuts. So I just put together let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, share. So I'll make this available for anyone that wants it, but I just want to go over a couple of key points for post-game stories. Let's just see, your catchy headline I mentioned. The vast majority don't get past the first 2 paragraphs, I said. So don't bury the lead. It amazes me how many times I'll read someone's game story, and in the last or second or third to last paragraph, that's where the lead of the story is, that someone scored 4 goals, or they were 6 for 6 batting, and etc. So you have to figure out what the important point is in your story, and that has to go at the top, probably in the headline. You want to attract attention, so don't bury the lead. The most important part of the story, that's got to be at the top. As I say, the first 2 paragraphs should be short and informative. So let me just skip down here because we're running out of time. We'll share this to make it available to anyone who wants it. Some key writing tips: proofread. It's amazing how many times you don't notice a mistake, a typo, until the next day. Sometimes it's embarrassing. I've seen some very embarrassing headlines in major media outlets, including a headline that said penalty shit instead of penalty shot. And it's because people don't take the time to proofread. So that has to really be done. Then the other key thing in writing is don't repeat words and phrases throughout the story. It's amazing how many times people write a story, a university sports story, they mention the word university. So they'll say, the McGill University Redbirds defeated the Concordia University Stingers 5-3 in the Canadian University Championship, etc., etc. Stop the repetition of words. Look for words that are repeated. And if you can find a way to remove words without changing your story is more effective if you have no repeated words, especially the word the. I was looking yesterday on the web just to catch an example. The first game story I looked at, you just scroll down here quickly as we're out of time. I found a story from, I don't want to belittle schools, but this was a story I found, and the word the was used in this story 40 times. The story is only 320 words long, and the word the is used 40 times. And the word would, he would do that, was used 18 times. That's incredible. So it means the person A doesn't know how to write and B doesn't know how to edit. So the key is you got to learn little tricks like that, looking for repeated words. So I don't know if you can read this or not, but all the woulds and thus I highlighted. And if you look in the first sentence, the word the is repeated 5 times in one sentence, the opening sentence. And in the next sentence, it's repeated another million times. And the word would is in there in almost every single sentence. So the key here is to look at what you're writing, maybe write it the way you think. It sounds good, but we have to read it back and you have to spend time editing, proofreading, look for repeated words. And if you can say it without those words, just remove the word and have the same sentence. You can shorten your sentence. It's more effective. So that's the short version. We're out of time here, I think, Jill. So I don't want to go too much longer, but this at the end of this story, I have all these kind of headlines that I've used to kind of catch eyeballs, and I find that it's amazing how much attention the headlines get, and I think that you can get a good idea by reading a couple of them and seeing. Here's the one I kind of like. McGill razzled. Daou was our top scorer, dazzled, and the Carabins, our opponent, were frazzled. And another one that I liked that got a lot of attention down south was McGill outsmarts Harvard for coveted Kovo Cup in memorable meeting of Mensa minds. So for those of you that don't know Mensa, that's a group of highly intelligent people. It's a special a club of people with IQs of like 140 or higher. So by having that in there, it's amazing how much attention it caught. So anyway, I see that we're just about out of time, so I don't want to go on too long, but we'll share this document for anyone that's interested, and this will sort of give you a few pointers that you might need.
Thank you so much, Earl. That document looks like it would onboard all of my staff, so it would be great if you could share that. I'm sure it'll be used across the country.
What's the best way to share? Just email it to you, or
yeah, email it to me, Earl. Yeah, and I'll make it available for sure. Thank you, guys. I know the chat's been pretty active, but I think we've had some good discussion there too. Pearl, my favorite headline there was Magilla the Thrilla, Thrilla Magilla. That was pretty good.
I overused that one too many times, but I like it. It's a great headline. That McGill wins and so and so wins in Thrilla at McGill. It got a lot of attention, that one.
I love it. All right, folks, it looks like we're out of time. We'd like to give a big thanks to our presenters today for the discussion and insights. Again, the webinar will be on demand later today on the College Sports Communicators website, so please share that information with your colleagues. I'll put it on our Facebook group as well. We encourage you to check out collegesportscommunicators.com for updated information on what's on tap for CSC's upcoming Unite 23 convention. CSC is offering a Know Before You Go coffee shop tomorrow at 2 p.m. And a reminder to make sure that your graduate and undergraduate students and interns are aware of the CSC U Camp, a virtual 2-day event for aspiring and young professionals taking place on June 1 and 2. The virtual event is free, but it does require advanced registration at at their website. That's collegesportscommunicators.com. So thanks again to Will from CSC, Rich, Adam, and Earl for a great webinar. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.